Please help me welcome Mayor Tim Keller.
Thank you so much, and good afternoon. I really appreciate that, and it's a special day here for me to be in front of you. Although I have to share with you why. It's my 6-year-old's birthday. So, you know, we had cake last night, we'll have cake again tonight, and that's what 6-year-olds want. So, but I am very glad to be here because it's been a little over a year since we were last able to provide you with a bit of a city update, so it's time. We've got lots to discuss with you over lunch. And let me begin with just a couple of introductions. I don't want to spend too much time on that. But there are some folks at the city that I want to make sure everyone knows and sort of recognizes in case you want to talk with them after. And I think everyone here knows I've tried to put together a team that really blends experience, folks who really know what they're doing, have been at the city a long time, and also some real new talent. And so some of those folks who are here today, I want to mention a few of them. Some of our folks who are sort of newer to the city, but I think many will recognize our aviation director. She runs everything at the airport, Nika Allen. Cynthia, thank you. Cynthia Jaramillo, our economic development director, of course, came from the Hispano Chamber. Cynthia, thank you. And I think, I do see Chief Medina in the house. Chief Medina is our deputy chief. He runs all the field operations. So he's the guy who goes to your house when you need him. Now, also, with a city as big as Albuquerque, we have, of course, a $1 billion budget and about 6,000 employees. We also have reoccurring turnover. One, importantly, that I want to share with you today, we have a new interim director of planning. I think a familiar face and name to everyone, Brennan Williams. He's been with the city a long time, will be a steady hand at that department. Brennan, give us a wave. He's back over there. Thank you, Brennan. Also, I want to mention those of you who work with our Metropolitan Redevelopment Program. Big deal for the city. The head of that program is here with us, Karen Iverson. Karen, give us a wave, too. Thank you, Karen. Right there. And lastly, of course, two, I think, regular faces, but always should be introduced. Number one, our Metropolitan team, and Karen's actually going to report to Lawrence Rael now, our COO. Lawrence, thank you for being here. And, of course, our city's Chief Administrative Officer, Sarita Nair. Now, last year, I think we gave you a bit of a formal speech, somewhat traditional in many ways. I think what I'd like to try this afternoon is sharing with you a little bit about our city over the course of 10 pictures. So, we're going to begin with this picture right here. And I think it's going to turn here in just a minute. We'll make sure we got our AV working here. Oh, I skipped ahead. All right, there we go. Has anyone been to a United game? Some folks. We're happy about the Albuquerque United, the New Mexico United, I should say. By the way, if you don't know, some of the ownership team are a part of NAIOP, so good to know. And this is a very, very special thing that's happening in our city right now. And if you have a chance to look up and just take a look at what you see there, the pageantry, the festiveness, and I think in many ways the passion. And I want to tell you a little bit of a story about how this came to be. There's a long backstory, I'm sure, with the ownership group and with Peter Trevisani, who's sort of the lead person in terms of operations and ownership, and getting the team here. But from a city perspective, they came to the city, and they were like, hey, we need a stadium to play in. And I was like, sounds like a great idea. Where are we going to do this? And we sort of decided, well, Isotopes is really our kind of showcase stadium right now, at least for natural grass and outdoors. And then it was like, well, how can we do that? We have this pitcher's mound, and how do we get the schedule right and this kind of thing? And all of a sudden, we started going down, I think, a familiar path in our city in many ways. A path of skepticism. So it was like, well, hold on a second. Why are we doing soccer? Is that really the right sport? And then it was like, turns out it's going to cost us about $700,000, which, depending on your perspective, might sound like a lot or not. And there's like, is this what we're going to do with your taxpayer money? And then there were, of course, others who were like, well, I've got better ideas to do, both at the park and with that money. And this kind of chain started, this skepticism and this, idea that there's other projects out there. And we just decided, you know what? We're just going to pick the idea and we're going to give it a shot and we're going to see how it goes. Fortunately, it has been a huge success. They sell out now almost every game in advance, 15,000 folks passionate about the game the entire way. We now have to open up Civic Plaza for the away games so that our town can watch the away games. This has been a tremendous example, I think, of how we can be united in many ways around a common good, around a goal. And of course, so for me, this is, I think, a little bit indicative that also we are capable of more in Albuquerque, perhaps more than we often think. And we've got to sort of move past, selling ourselves short, whether it's that path to skepticism or it's the idea that there might be some better ideas out there. Let's just pick some and let's bet on them and let's watch our city perform. Thank you. Now, I think a prime example of that, and it's just getting started, begins with this map. Now, some of you might be able to figure out what this is. Those of you familiar with the shape of our city, legally, this is our city. It's not square-shaped. And these are the beat maps. And the dot, right, is the number of crime incidences in our city. Now, people ask me all the time, like, well, where's crime in Albuquerque? Where should we focus on crime? Think about this slide for a second. Where is crime in our city? It's everywhere, right? It's all over the city of Albuquerque. Sure, some of those dots are bigger than others, but the reality is this is a challenge for our entire community. And I think this realization, this is a fundamental fact that we are now uniting around when it comes to law enforcement and public safety. Because for the first time in a long time, we are working together in one, I think, impressive way that is actually making a difference. We are saying that instead of actually blaming other agencies for what we have to do, saying, so-and-so's got to do this, the state has to do this, and the DA's got to do this, and the judges have to do that, there is enough to do for every single person who's involved in public safety. And the key is not just highlighting what everyone else has to do. It's stepping up and doing what you can do, doing the best that you can, wearing your particular hat that you've been given by the voters of Central New Mexico. And so for us, things are starting to look a little bit different. This is a picture, and it's a little bit subtle, so I want to highlight a few things for you. This is a picture taken hours after a violent crime that happened in our city. And if you look at this, there's a couple of things that I want to point out. One, you see a firefighter, that badge on the, which would be your left-hand side as a firefighter. Then you see a police officer there as well. Then you see a community member. That is not the victim or the victim's parents of this crime. That's a neighbor. This is all about community policing. And I will tell you that who you don't see in the picture is folks from the DA's office, folks from CYFD, folks being engaged regardless of where they work in this particular situation. And what we're doing is something about community policing that we don't often talk about a lot. It's not just showing up to your neighborhood event and talking with you about what's happening with crime stats. It's showing up when you need us, but not just for the victims, for the community that is also impacted, that in many ways is traumatized. They are here working on our violence initiative that has to do with multiple parts of it, dealing with crime from all sides. That's what this is about, dealing with crime from all sides, including working with folks in the area who are traumatized by these events, and at the same time, working the case. They're getting information, what was happening, what's been happening in the neighborhood. Are there others associated? Thank you. And so this is very, very important, and it's a different kind of policing. It's doing the same thing in many ways we were always doing on a one-off basis, but now we're doing it together. Now we're actually coordinating our efforts. This is not an accident. This is what we are doing now after every violent crime in central Albuquerque, and that includes in situations with the county and so forth. Now, also what you see in here, I think, is something that I just want to really emphasize. It's being there with the community in their time of need. And this is very, very important to restore that trust. It's a two-way trust. It's a trust in our belief that our city is going to get safer and that our law enforcement folks are doing everything they can to make it safer. But it's also about us trusting the community, right? It's about the community saying, okay, I'm going to work with this team and I'm going to get the help I need, but I'm also going to help them catch the person who did this, bring justice to this particular neighborhood. So for us, this is very, very important. I think it's about owning each individual's responsibility and stepping up to help others. We're there telling CYFD, how can we help you keep our kids safe? We're trying to tell the DA's office, how can you do better at prosecution? We are not waiting anymore for anyone else to do those changes. We are trying to do more and more every single time someone calls 911. Now, I also want to mention here, we have a long, long road to go. But for the first time in a decade, all our crime stats are actually down. That is a tremendous thing. That is something we should be thankful for. Now, we've got a long road ahead of us. And for me, and I think for everyone involved in these efforts, it's also about getting past the sort of one quick fix concepts. There aren't any when crime is this bad. It's also about, forming a temporary task force to deal with X, Y, or Z. It's about saying this is actually a sustained effort. It's about literally who calls who when a crime happens, who calls who before to prevent a crime. And that's why you see us now developing protocols with all of our partner agencies to actually instruct us what to do going forward in each and every aspect of our job. But part of that is also thinking about our kids and our families and our children. And I want to show you another picture. This one is a little bit different. It's of a swimming pool. This is one of our swimming pools. If you don't know, we actually have lots of great swimming pools all around the city. And this one is about realizing that the connection, clearly, which everyone here understands, between education and between crime is that intersection between what our children are doing when they're growing up, what they're learning in school, how they're being raised, what's happening in the family, and what's happening in their neighborhoods. So for me, I think it's a similar story. I know even when I was a state senator and when I was state auditor, I took a lot of shots at APS. I will tell you, I was very critical of what's happening in our school system. And there's many reasons to be critical, but I know this. We have got to take responsibility for what we as individuals can do. And as your mayor, I'm trying to no longer point the finger at APS. In fact, I'll leave it up to the voters and up to everyone else to even deal with accountability issues. My job is to help APS. My job is to help our kids find something productive and active to do when the city can step up, and that's after school and over the summer. This, I believe, is an approach that we're uniting our city around. If any of you are involved with different things like Boys Club, United Way, YMCA, you're seeing that this is something we're bringing folks together around in our kids' cabinet. And the whole point of the kids' cabinet is basically that if kids are involved and engaged throughout the day, both in school and after school, and over the summer, they're going to stay out of trouble, they're going to continue learning, they're going to find role models, and they're also going to have outlets beyond their family, which in many cases, unfortunately, is not the best outlet for their challenges. And so what we're seeing is tremendous growth in our programming around kids. In the last 2 years, we have now put, actually just last year, 24,000 kids in our summer programs. That is 1/3 of the entire city in our summer programs. That is a great thing for us. And to show you how this kind of maps out, we also have 11,000 in our after-school programs. We gave out this year 80,000 swimming pool passes. That is one for every kid in the city of Albuquerque. That, no matter how you count it, is a good thing for our families and for our children. And so I hope also going forward, we're going to talk about some ways that I could use your help. This is one good way. If you are involved in any program, any nonprofit that works with after-school kids or over the summer, make sure and connect with us after so that we can unite you with our Youth Connect program and make sure we're getting the most out of every single nonprofit, faith-based community, every single city program. And by the way, if parents are out there, enrollment is now for these. So I know there's probably some in the room who use some of these programs. So hop online to the One Albuquerque app and you can sign up. Now, let's talk a little bit about economic development. How many of you know what these signs are? A few show of hands. I think this room's probably, I figured about half. So these signs, a lot of people ask me, like, what is up with these yellow signs? And I also get a lot, because they're not really, hung in the most, delicate way. I mean, they're kind of tacky, let's just admit it. Especially when you see 5 of them on a light pole and things like this. This is the new sign of economic development. So for those of you who don't, that's right. For folks who don't know, these are the signs that they're secret signs. They're coded, and they tell film crews where to go. And movie fans out there, the one in the middle is WW. That's Walter White. That was the signal for everyone from Breaking Bad where they were going to go for the shoot. So you see these signs, of course, now popping up more and more all over our city. And they're not happening by accident. And I think since last we spoke, I laid out an economic development program that was really focused on a fundamental concept. And the concept was really that we have to focus on sectors where we have a competitive advantage. We want every sector to do good. We want everyone to do good in the private sector with all their businesses. But when it comes to your taxpayer money and investing that money in a business, in a public-private partnership or an incentive program, we want to stay focused on sectors and key areas that we believe have high growth potential and that are nationally competitive. And so film is by far the biggest example of this. And so I think it's important to pause and just reflect. In the last year and 18 months, we have brought Netflix and Universal NBC to Albuquerque. That is outstanding. That is something I actually never thought we would do. This is a real growth industry for our city, and I'm going to map out a little bit the economic impact on this. But let me share with you a quick story on how we got there. It's not like we called Netflix and said, please come to Albuquerque. It also wasn't, I wish through all the hard work we do with AED that it was all about just reaching out and we could just, have a little film program in California and say everyone should move to New Mexico. But it takes much more than that. It takes individuals who know the industry deeply, and it also takes this sort of collision, which we've talked about a little bit with respect to things like Innovate ABQ. It takes a collision space where we're creating the conversation. And so we got Netflix not because we were talking to them about moving to Albuquerque, because we were talking to them about a direct flight. We needed more direct flights for the film industry from Burbank into Albuquerque. And it was in that conversation that luckily, and it was Alicia Keys, who's now our economic development director, and some others, they said, they heard about, we need a new studio. We're looking around in North America, and they're like, why don't you come here? We have Q studios, it might be for sale. And so that's where that deal started. And when you do something that big, there's usually ripple effects. And sure enough, literally the day after, the phone started ringing. I started getting phone calls. Our office started getting phone calls. Additional conversations were had. And now that it's finally done, I can tell you the Universal deal was put together within the nexus of it, the origin of it, was put together within weeks of the Netflix deal because of one another. That is because of a deliberate focus. And I think that's something that is going to have a profound impact upon our city in New Mexico. And so let me show you a little bit about how this is playing out. On your left-hand side, you see a list of companies that we've invested your taxpayer money in. And you see our film companies up there, but I think you also see the other side of this strategy, which is that we've got to grow our own. We've got to invest in our local companies as well. And you can see a lot of them up there. These are companies that we believe have a strategic advantage, that if we can keep them here, if we can retain them, and if we can support them to grow further, we believe that they're actually hopefully going to be, one of these companies that is a homegrown success story that is first regionally competitive and then one day perhaps nationally. So when you put all of these together, you get the numbers in the column on the next column over. And it's about a total of $7.5 million with council's support that we've been able to invest in these companies. And it's created around 3,200 jobs. That's the net figure that we've invested in through this type of strategy. But there's another number in there too, that 52,000 number. That is the average wage, the average salary of these investments. That is much higher than the median wage in Albuquerque. This is another thing that I'm very sensitive to when it comes to developing a high return on investment of our taxpayer dollars. Our investments, for the most part, not all, for the most part, have to lift up that average wage rate, right? And so that's what's been flat or has been going down over the last 10 years, and we see this here. And then lo and behold, the next column. Our anchor institutions, if you will, our anchor companies, stepping up big time. And so this is a wonderful way where as mayor, I can sort of take credit for this. I will tell you we had nothing to do with it other than, I think, presenting a city that is ready for this. We did have conversations around public safety, by the way, with respect to some of these growth areas. But I think everyone in this room knows what's happening with the labs, with 1,900 jobs coming in and 300 from Intel. Those dollar numbers, you can see the average salary there. Now, let's look at the impact. There's a bunch of ways to calculate economic impact, but this one to me is really, really simple. This is just if you multiply the number of jobs times the average wage. This is the number of new annual wages in our city, or in, Intel, we'll call, the one Albuquerque region. Almost $500 million in new wages coming in the next 2 years. That has got to make a difference, right? We've got to feel that. This is the biggest wage infusion into our city in a decade. And I have to believe we are going to be in a much different place economically in just a couple of years. Thank you. Now, since this is, I know there's folks from all different professions here, but just because it is a developers-led gathering, I want to talk a little bit about development. And so the other side, of course, of the economic development coin, there's the job story, and then there's also the infrastructure investment story. Now, this picture, I think many of you, especially in commercial real estate, have much better pictures than this. But I think this one, at least, will speak to the point. And so what we're trying to do with infrastructure is something a little bit different. We really believe that in many ways, we don't want to let the perfect be the enemy of the good. We are trying to push through projects that are just good projects. We're done asking detailed questions. We're done holding back projects that have been there for 10 years. So you see on this list, essentially some pictures of these projects that I think ring a bell to many folks. You see the dollar amount. Depends on what those are. All of these, at least except for Presbyterian, which is TBD, but all of them have some form of MR or IRB or something involved in them, and probably will in the future if they don't already. But some of these are very old. Rail yards, right? We're putting $14 million in the rail yards. If you approve the bond in November. I'll talk about that more in a little bit. But we've already put several million in there. And if you look at even the Highland project, that dollar figure is just the initial, that's just the first round. That's going to be a total of $90 million when it's done. You see some other projects there that have been around for a long time. Central and Unser, I think, might even go back to Mayor Baca. I'm not sure. That one had been around for a long time. We are finally getting these projects done. And it's due to being united around this concept, whether it's with the county, whether it's with all of the folks in the business community, trying to say, okay, do you really just have $1 million capital gap? Is that the issue? Then we should talk. So we're trying to push through this and make sure that we are getting those dollars out. And if you look at this, in total, roughly, it's another about $500 million, just these projects, not to mention all the other ones, in infrastructure projects that are going to be happening over the next few years or that are about completed right now. This, I think, is a great thing for our city. And so this is what I share when people say, well, what is Albuquerque growing and what's happening in real estate? I know it's complicated, but I've got to tell you $500 million has to also matter. And so our growth rate as a whole, our GDP growth rate for the last several years has been almost 2%. It's been like 1.7, 1.8. Last year, luckily, we hit like 2.7, which was a huge amount of growth on a percentage basis. But I have to believe with these two things that I've shared with you, that we do have a positive economic forecast. I know we've got a long way to go, but I tell you, if these two investments together don't make a difference and drive that growth, I will be very surprised. And I think this is also a good point. I want to thank all of you who have not given up on these 10-year-old deals because we're finally getting them done. And if you got more in the queue, come see us. Now, let's talk about some areas where we might be less united, where in many ways I think we're still divided. This is what we're going to do with the art project. Just kidding, it's not the art project. We can talk about that a little bit if you want. This is an area, I think, where we have some other divisions that I want to speak to. This is, if you can read these words, I know it's a little bit small, these are locations where folks who are dealing with homelessness either have to go or might have to be taken to. And so you see on here a myriad of shelters, dozens of shelters. You also see the jail, you also see the emergency room, and you see where they're mapped out along our city. And I think this picture describes in many ways also one person's journey. So let's think for a second just if you are in that position, and it's very difficult to pick one type of homeless person because it's actually a broad spectrum. There are hundreds of people who really are down on their luck and need a job. There are also hundreds of people who have major addiction problems. There are also hundreds of people who have mental illness. There are also hundreds of people who have other health problems. And there also are hundreds of people who are just transient and passing through. But we know this, we are getting hundreds more homeless folks every single year. This is a problem that is not going to go away without a major investment by the city. And it's something that we have looked in the past to the private sector, to the nonprofit sector, to faith-based communities, many of these are faith organizations, to do all they can, and they are. They're doing all they can in their own way. In some ways, this is sort of a go-it-alone strategy. It's like, you know what? I serve lunch to homeless people because that's the calling I have in my life, and that's what my church supports, and so that's what we're going to do. But it's just not cutting it. It's not good enough. Right now, there's 7 places you can get lunch in Albuquerque on a weekday, and there's nowhere you can get lunch on a weekend. This is why you have things like Coronado Park. Coronado Park is the default clearinghouse where everyone goes to and from all of these services. So what you have here is a system that is showing us what the whole is. It's showing us that if I've got to go sleep somewhere, way out on the west side, or maybe, and then I have to go during the day to a day shelter to get lunch, then I have to go all the way to the Social Security office to get a new Social Security card, then I've got to go to healthcare for the homeless to get some injections that I need because I'm diabetic, and then somehow in the middle of that process, which I'm usually walking through, I also have to get treatment for my addiction problem. It's almost impossible right now, despite everyone's effort. That's, I think, what is so tragic about this. Because we are trying hard. This is not about effort. It's about a lack of unity. It's about how we've got to come together and we've got to say, you know what, we shouldn't be doing this alone. We've got to coordinate exactly what we're doing. And I want to share with you this concept because it's very basic. Almost every city in America, every major city has one of these places. And it has different names, looks different in every city, it's operated differently in every city. But at the end of the day, they all have it. And it's just one place, which is a clearinghouse, where those folks go, and then they can get the services they need. So the service providers either pick them up or meet with them or do case management. Everyone is connected into at least one area. Because right now, if you are a family, you have to go to a different area. If you're a man, you have to go to the men's shelter. If you're a woman, you have to go to the women's shelter. If you meet all these other criteria, if you're not sober, you can't go into into some of our detox centers. There's gates to every one of those places that I showed you on the map. There has to be one place with no gate. Because what happens if there's all these gates is if APD actually has to take someone who is likely or about to commit a violent act somewhere, what are their choices? The emergency room or the police station? And it's the same thing if somebody wants to go voluntarily. What if you have a family member, you know someone? Who do you actually call to deal with that person who's passed out under a tree? Right now, you have to find your way through that map that I showed you. We've got to have one place to deal with this. This is the biggest issue on our ballot in November, in the bond issue. We are asking our community, we're asking each and every one of you to invest $14 million of our city taxpayer money to solve this problem and create some sort of clearinghouse so we can start dealing with this. Now that's phase 1. There's probably going to have to be a phase 2. But I will tell you, if we don't do this, our homeless challenges and our panhandling challenges, I do not believe they will get better. Because right now we are already doing everything we can on an individual basis. We've got to bring everyone together. And that is both programmatically and it's geographically. And so this is what I'm going to need your help on, among with other things. Now I want to mention that's also a vertical construction project. So that should be some good news for folks here. And in that $120 million bond issue, $125 million bond issue, there's actually lots of vertical construction. You know, it kind of swings back and forth. Lots of times it's roads and horizontal. This one's heavy on vertical, so you should all support it. Now, let me talk a little bit more about this challenge that we're facing with respect to what we're dealing with, homelessness and addiction. These are 2 signs, and I think if we can switch back to the PowerPoint, this is the orange sign and the blue sign. And so these two signs, I think in many ways, exhibit this challenge that we're facing as well. Okay, there we go, sorry. I know, thanks, bear with me here, there we go. So we've all seen these blue signs, right? Remember the blue signs, call 311. This was a good idea. I mean, it was an attempt at trying to do something. And trying also to take donations, you know. And I think though in many ways it shows a couple of things. One, it's not really connected to the individual who is suffering with homelessness, because like if they call 311, I mean, yeah, we can give them another number to call, right? I mean, 311 is a clearinghouse, right? And also donating, that donation page, it just went to the United Way, which is great. And I'm a big supporter of the United Way. In fact, the city is one of the biggest contributors to United Way. But it's so disconnected from that individual challenge. What we are trying to say is for this challenge, we've got to focus. We've got to focus on an area that makes the most difference and also has the highest return on investment. And that is housing vouchers. Housing vouchers is really the only undisputed high return on investment thing you can do for homelessness. And the concept is very simple. It just says that that person fundamentally, to get them off the street, needs somewhere to sleep. And if you get them an apartment, typically we say housing, but it usually starts with an apartment, and then you push all those services into that apartment. So the addiction treatment, the case management, all of it is done there, so it's not done out in Coronado Park or out in all of the shelters that we're talking about. And the theory actually over time, these have a very high success rate. Now, high in this world is like 30%, but that is way better than anything else we can do. And it's also much, much cheaper. So we've created the One Albuquerque Housing Fund, the orange sign, which is meant to direct you specifically. Instead of handing money outside your door, donate to the housing fund. And what we will show you is the actual people that we house with your help. That's where we want to go with this. We're actually going to be creating a city foundation to do this in a much larger way that you're going to be hearing about, the One Albuquerque City Foundation. And we're going to work with all the nonprofit providers who already do this. So we're not going to be doing any of this, we're going to let the professionals do it. But we are going to ask you, instead of donating to the Mayor's Ball, we are going to ask you to donate to the One Albuquerque Housing Fund at the Mayor's Ball. And so we're also going to ask everyone through their app, as they're feeling the need to help in any way. This is one way, and literally in which $10, $2, $3, once you get to around $20,000, we will show you that one person that you took off the street. So for us, this is about focus, it's about accountability, and it's about a way where each of us can actually make a specific difference. That, I think, is critical for us going forward. Now, let me talk a little bit more about this concept, about the United, the New Mexico United, but in our case, I think Albuquerque, a city that is becoming united. For us, I think we are moving past some of our biggest challenges, and some of those challenges have been either reaching for big ideas that will quickly solve our challenges, or it's been about competing about good ideas. I can't tell you the number of ideas I get presented by many of you in this room that are awesome ideas. I would love to be the water capital of America. I would love to be the solar capital of America. I would love to have the best biomedical injection program in America. I want all of those things. But I also know that we've got to start somewhere. And we have to take a meaningful step forward together, even if your particular idea isn't chosen. Even for me, if it's not my favorite idea. The point is, we've got to make some strategic bets, and we've got to go with those, and we have to give them a shot. And I know we can do more than we think we can, because I've seen it, even in just the last year. I remember when the session was in, and we had our new governor for the first time in 8 years, and I looked at how much money the city had been getting in terms of capital outlay, which ends up going to construction. And, we've been getting about $20 million a year. And I remember saying to my former colleagues in the legislature, $20 million a year, we're half the state economically, if not more. Other than some great work on oil and gas country in terms of getting us tax revenue, we're the economic engine of the state of New Mexico. This is also where we all come, we as the state of New Mexico, where we come for healthcare, where we come for our airport. It's also where we come to go to the mall. This is, as we all know, even where many of our kids all around New Mexico come to go to school. This also means we get all of our challenges. We get New Mexico's challenges, not just Albuquerque's. But both sides go together. And so this is part of our challenge, but I think it's also part of our honor. It's part of the city that I love. And it's part of something that for me is a story that is a statewide story. And so this year I went up to Santa Fe and I didn't say, hey, we're big and awesome, give us money. That was tried in the past, it didn't work. And I also didn't say that we don't matter and we should just have the same that we've been getting before. I said, we need your help. We give to the entire state of New Mexico. And we also need your help to fund things like a homeless shelter, to fund fixing traffic at the balloon fiesta, to fund rebuilding the rail yards, to fund these programs that have been stuck for years. We need all of New Mexico's help to deal with that, and most importantly, public safety. And so in total, we more than doubled the amount of money we got from Santa Fe. We got $70 million, including $30 million for law enforcement. This is not just Albuquerque uniting. This is New Mexico uniting, and that is a great thing. Thank you. Now, the other example I want to share on this is the senior games. By the way, is Councilor Winter here? I know we have a lot of city councilors here. He might not be here today. You know, Councilor Winter competed, our own city councilor, in the pole vault in the National Senior Games. It's just extraordinary to see. But for him, I think also he got to see, if some of you didn't go out to all of these games, we hosted 20,000 people over the course of 10 days. This is, other than the Balloon Fiesta, the biggest thing we've done in a decade. And it involved almost every city facility. It involved our neighboring tribes. It involved even Cochiti Lake for the marathon. This also pumped in, we'll see what the actual numbers look like, forecasted $24 million into our economy. And everyone had the same excuses as always. Are we big enough? Can we do it? Maybe we should try something else. And I want to give the former mayor credit. He's the one who actually set this up. We had to deliver on it. And it took a third of the city to pull this off. A third of the city employees helped with this. And unbelievably, 8,000 volunteers in the city of Albuquerque. That is extraordinary. That is such a good lift for our city. And I think it shows what we can do when we're united. And so for me going forward, I believe, one, there is a reason for some sober optimism in those examples that I just gave you. But I also believe we've got to be realistic. We can talk about that crime is down in every category, but I know, and you know, it's still some of the highest in the country in every category. I know that the problems we're facing are so challenging, they're going to take years to deal with. But I also believe that if we come together around some of these priorities and we get past some of the things that have been holding us back, I really believe Albuquerque can make that step change. The step change that I think we all know we're capable of. That change that puts us back up on par with some of the major cities around us. And I believe for us, there's also an opportunity in the short term where I need your help. This bond issue coming up is very important. There's all sorts of stuff on the ballot, some of which you might not like, some of which I hope you'll like. I want you to like the stuff we're supporting. But fundamentally, at a minimum, just support all the construction projects. And I'm sure you'll be hearing more about the C&M work and the APS work on there. But for us, we've got to have your help for the city of Albuquerque on that bond issue. I will tell you, too, there is a transportation tax renewal, keyword renewal. It is not a new tax. We have to have that renewed. And I will tell you, it has nothing to do with the art project. So if you hear that, just remind folks, this is something we've had, I think, for 3 decades now. And we just renew it, and it pays for all of our public transportation efforts. So we've got a lot to do in November. And I need your help on that. And also, we're going to be reaching out to you with respect to this concept of One Albuquerque. We are going to be asking for the community support in 3 key areas. I mentioned the first one, housing vouchers. Housing vouchers are very mathematical. The more we put in, the more folks we're going to get off the street. And we can track them, we can hold them accountable, we can get them the services they need. That's one area where we're going to need your help. The second area is around a small thing, in many ways a fun thing. We believe soon we are going to max out the city ability to put kids in summer programs. That means we're going to run out of budget to actually do all these swim lessons and basketball programs and teen nights, and we're going to need your help. And so if you're interested, your organizations are interested in saying, you know what, I think every kid who wants one should have a swim lesson. That's $20, and you can have a swim lesson for a kid. These are areas where we can all pitch in. And the last area is around police recruiting. We got our 100 officers in the last year. That was my commitment to you, and I'm so glad we got that. And what I shared with you about community policing, you cannot do unless you have more officers. And when I say officers, that's shorthand for everything in public safety. Some of those folks are paramedics, some of those are trauma psychologists, and a lot of those are specialists in APD dealing with violent crime, crimes against children. That's what that means when we say more officers. But we need 300 more to get to our goal of 400 over 4 years. And so at some point, we're going to not be able to poach everyone else from around New Mexico, which is what we've been doing. So it's a good problem to have. And of course, Dave Campbell's now clapping because he works at Rio Rancho now. Congrats, Dave, on the gig. I'll remind you that I think the police department might be separate. I don't know. No, anyway, we are done. Trying to poach folks. It was something we needed to do, and I'll say I did work with all the other mayors on that. I think actually net it worked out okay, and we got our additional 100. But we're going to have to go to other cities now. That's one thing we're going to need your help with. We're going to be setting up delegations, and then when recruits come here to literally try and sell them on trying to come to our community and help us be safe. And the last thing is recruiting at our high school and college level. The only way out of this problem for all governments in New Mexico is to have more of our homegrown kids want to grow up to be police and firefighters. And so that has to do with marketing, it has to do with outreach, but stay tuned for more on that. We're going to be asking us to come together as one Albuquerque to support those concepts. So I hope with today's comments, you feel that we are on a journey together in many ways. There are lots of things we're united around, all those examples that I shared, but I also know we've got a long way to go, and there are some key areas where we've got to come together around and support. But I know this, we are just getting started, and I believe in this city, and I believe in each and every person in this room, and I am committed for me and my family to be here for as long as it takes to make this the best Albuquerque it can be. Thank you so much for letting me share a few words with you, and I look forward to working with you in the future. Thank you, Albuquerque.